In the dry hush of a Barrow Creek evening, when the wind whistled like a memory you couldn't quite forget, a woman named Clara Wynne stepped off the coach with nothing but a faded shawl and a letter no one else would have answered. 51 years old, twice abandoned, and now sent like a parcel to a place she hadn't chosen, the sprawling ranch of Clinton Rourke, a man they called the stone-hearted cattle king. Folks in town whispered that Clinton hadn't smiled since the day his wife died and his son stopped speaking. They said his house was full of ghosts and work, and that no housekeeper stayed more than a week. So why send Clara Wynne, a woman with no kin, no dowry, and hips the world deemed too wide for marriage because no one else would go? But here's the part no one expected. Not the ranch hands who watched her with suspicion, not the cook who warned don't speak unless spoken to, not even Elias Traeger who handed her a mop and walked away. What no one expected was that Clara Wynne would stay. And somehow, through dust, silence, and her quiet way of listening, something in that cold ranch house would begin to breathe again. Because sometimes the job nobody wants becomes the life someone was meant for. And the man who'd forgotten how to feel might just learn to love again. What happens next when kindness is mistaken for weakness? When past wounds are reopened in the most unexpected ways? And how does a woman called too much become the very heart of a broken man's home? Stay with us. You're not going to want to miss what unfolds next. The morning she was sold felt like any other in the town of Barrow Creek, dusty, quiet, and pretending not to notice what it shouldn't. Clara Wynne, 51 and wide-hipped, stood still beside the auction block, holding a single worn satchel. No one touched her, but all had touched the rumor that she was a widow twice over, too big to bear more children, and worse yet, too gentle to be useful. $5 to take her off our hands, barked Samuel Hart, her late husband's brother. Or best offer. The crowd did not cheer, did not mock. They simply looked elsewhere, as if her sorrow was contagious. No one came forward. No one until a voice calm and deep as a canyon shadow said, "I'll take her." The crowd turned to see Elias Traeger, a quiet rancher whose boots seldom left the edge of his dying property. A widower. A man who hadn't spoken a full sentence in church in 6 years. No one could say much about him except that he worked hard and kept to himself since losing his wife to fever and his son to fire. "You got land to tend," someone muttered. "Not charity to give." But Elias said nothing more. Just walked up to Clara, looked her in the eye, not at her belly, not at the satchel, not at the humiliation, and said softly, "You'll ride with me?" He offered no promises, and she made none either. But Clara nodded, stepped off the auction block, and climbed onto the back of his wagon. Not a rescue, not yet, just a new place to be invisible in. But something had shifted in the wind that morning, something old and aching like bones, starting to remember how to move. The ride to Elias Traeger's homestead was long, quiet, and unsettled, like two ghosts rattling across open land too wide for conversation. Clara Wynne sat stiffly on the wooden bench beside him, hands folded over the faded satchel that held everything she hadn't yet lost. She didn't speak, and he didn't ask. The house, when they reached it, stood like a tired promise, Timber's grayed porch sagging but upright still, the way an old man stays standing in church because sitting down would feel like surrender. "You'll have the room on the right," Elias said. His voice was low but not unkind. "I take the loft." Clara nodded once. "I can cook, and sew some. I'll earn my keep." "I didn't ask you to." "I know," she said already, moving toward the door, her spine straight as iron. In the days that followed, Clara worked like someone owed something to herself. She chopped kindling, though her hands blistered, mended the curtain that hung lopsided across the only bedroom window, even braved the root cellar to bring up jars of forgotten peaches. But she did it all without asking, without speaking much at all. She was not trying to please him. She was trying to outrun her own shame. Because Clara had not been chosen, she'd been taken like something left too long on a shelf. And though Elias had not touched her, had not mocked or pitied, she knew kindness could be another kind of chain. One night she overheard him out in the barn murmuring to the horses as if they were old friends. That was the first time she let herself soften toward him, just a flicker, like the flame of a candle catching wind. But still, when he knocked on the door one morning and handed her a pair of boots wrapped in cloth, Clara looked at him with narrowed eyes. "Why you walk too much in bare feet?" he said. She folded the boots against her chest and said nothing, but she didn't return them either. The next morning she wore them, and though the leather was stiff and unfamiliar, she walked a little taller. Because sometimes the fight isn't with a person, it's with the voice inside that whispers, "You don't belong here." What happens when dignity fights back in silence and someone notices Elias Traeger never said much, but he saw everything. He saw the way Clara Wynne folded dish towels with military precision and left a sprig of sage by the windowsill, not for function, but beauty. He saw how she flinched when the wind knocked too hard against the door, as if expecting a man's fist to follow. And he noticed how she always chose the farthest chair from him at supper, like she was still unsure she deserved to stay. What he didn't say but quietly honored was the way Clara carried herself with a dignity forged in fire. She never begged, never complained. And though she spoke rarely when she did, her words were measured like teaspoons of sugar in coffee, just enough to take the edge off. One afternoon, Elias returned from checking fence posts to find the front steps swept, a chipped mug glued back together, and his dinner already simmering on the stove. He paused, took in the scent of onions and thyme, and said softly, "You didn't have to do all this." Clara turned from the stove, wiping her hands on her apron. "I know." They stood there, two people wrapped in quiet, until Elias added, "But I'm glad you did." And it wasn't just the meal. It was the way the house had changed since Clara's arrival. Warmer somehow. Lived in. Like it wasn't just holding out through time anymore. It was becoming something. He started leaving her little things without comment, a hand-carved spoon on the shelf, a flannel blanket folded neatly by the rocking chair, extra wood stacked near the fire. And in return, Clara began to hum while washing dishes. Just softly. But it was music all the same. One evening, she was out tending the chickens when a sudden crack of thunder split the sky. Elias dropped his tools and ran. Not because he thought she was helpless, but because something in him panicked at the thought of her in danger. He found her soaked through, eyes wide but steady. "You all right?" he asked, pushing his hat back, rain streaking his beard. "I'm fine," she said. "It's just water." But Elias stayed out there with her anyway, helping herd the panicked hens back into the coop, his hand brushing hers once and then again without apology. Afterward, when they stood dripping on the porch, he looked at her, really looked, and said, "You remind me of this land. Tough and worth saving." Clara didn't answer. But that night she placed a fresh towel by his door, folded tight as her resolve, and went to sleep with a strange warmth in her chest. When respect arrives softly without demand, can it build something unspoken, yet solid as a beam? The first time Clara Wynne realized the house had started calling her back, not just letting her stay, was when she reached for her shawl and found it already draped over her chair. Elias must have placed it there without a word. No one had ever done that before. Thought of her before the cold came. Out on the prairie, love didn't look like poetry. It looked like a pot kept warm an hour past dinner. It sounded like boots stomped clean before entering the house. It felt like a man who asked nothing but noticed everything. Elias Traeger didn't flirt. He didn't flatter. But one morning, after a quiet breakfast of cornbread and black coffee, he looked across the table and said, "You put a peace in this house I didn't know it could hold." Clara's hand paused over her spoon. "I didn't know it could hold peace," he repeated, voice low, like a confession. She nodded once slowly. "Neither did I." From then on, the stillness between them softened. In the evenings, she'd sew in the rocker while Elias read aloud from a tattered book of Psalms. Sometimes they'd sit close enough that the sides of their knees touched just barely, but neither moved away. Clara began placing 2 slices of bread in the tin instead of 1. Began humming when she stirred stew. She started speaking of things she never had, like planting flowers in spring, or painting the shutters, or keeping a dog. And Elias, he started showing her what his hands could do beyond fence posts and tools. He built a wooden shelf in the kitchen just for her spices, carved her name into the underside of the corner beam, small and secret, wrote it in cedar where only he would see it. One chilly morning, Clara opened the front door and found a gift sitting on the step, a clay pot already filled with soft, winter-ready soil, and a folded scrap of paper tucked inside. For when you're ready to plant something that stays. It wasn't signed. It didn't have to be. That evening, Clara touched his arm lightly as she passed behind his chair, just a brush of her fingers, as natural as reaching for air. Elias didn't flinch or freeze. He just turned slightly toward her, as if to say, "I felt that." And when she sat down beside him, neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. The room was full already with warmth, with kindness, with a love blooming slowly like prairie grass after a long winter. When love arrives gently without announcement, can it remake the walls around your heart? The frost came early that year, clinging to the fence posts like silver threads of a story long forgotten. Clara Wynne had risen before the rooster's call, more from memory than duty. She pulled on her boots, wrapped her shawl close, and stepped out into the hush of a prairie dawn. She didn't know that morning would hold a truth long buried. It happened by accident. She was tending to the root cellar sorting winter potatoes when a worn, leather-bound box fell from the upper shelf. Inside it were old letters faded with time, but still legible, the kind of paper that knows how to whisper. Elias's name was on every envelope. Clara hesitated. Then slowly she read. They were letters Elias had written but never sent. One was to a brother explaining the death of his wife Annalise and their infant daughter. Another to a banker refusing a sale. But the last was to no one, or maybe to everyone. I buried them both under the cottonwood tree. I kept the ring she wore and the shawl she wrapped our daughter in. I wear neither grief nor joy on my sleeve anymore. I simply keep moving like the cattle like the river. But something in me still hopes for a voice in the quiet, a softness that doesn't ask me to forget, only to let new light in. Clara folded the letter with trembling fingers. It was dated 4 winters ago, the same year she'd been cast out of her own life by a husband who saw her as burdensome, inconvenient. That year she thought she'd stop existing. Now she knew Elias had been grieving while she was breaking. That night she waited for Elias at the table stew, bubbling on the stove, a lantern casting golden shadows across the walls. When he came in tired and wind-chapped, Clara poured his coffee without a word. "I found your letters," she said gently after a long silence. Elias paused mid-reach. He didn't ask which letters. He only looked at her with a sadness too old to be surprised. "I wasn't snooping," she said. "They fell. The box. It just opened." He nodded slowly, shoulders sinking like old fences. "I'm sorry you had to carry it alone," she whispered. "All this time." Elias sat down. Not like a man defending himself, but like someone laying down a burden. "I didn't know if I had room left to feel anything more," he said. "But then, you came." "I'm not here to replace anyone," Clara said softly. "I just want to be beside you if there's room." "There is," Elias said, "and you didn't take it. You made it. They didn't touch. Not then." But in the silence, something deep and true passed between them. Something that couldn't be spoken, only shared. When the past unravels, will love still choose to stay? The first frost brought not only the cold, but whispers. It started with glances at the general store. Those long, thorny looks from women who remembered Clara from before. Then came the murmurs on Sunday, soft but sharp like wind, slicing through wheat. That she'd moved in with a man. That she wasn't wed. That she wasn't thin enough or proper enough or worthy enough of second chances. It all came to a boil the morning Reverend Price paid a visit. Clara was sweeping the porch when the tall man with the iron-gray beard arrived on horseback. His boots hit the dirt hard. She greeted him kindly, but he didn't smile. "Miss Wynne," he said, voice clipped. "I'm here on behalf of the Ladies' Committee." She nodded, broom in hand. "Is there something you need?" He hesitated, glancing at the door. "Is Mr. Boone home?" "No. He's tending fence posts near Hollow Ridge. Won't be back till sundown." The Reverend cleared his throat as though uncomfortable with his own words. "Several women in the congregation have expressed concern. They say you were taken in under unclear circumstances. That you live here, alone, with him." Clara's grip on the broom tightened. "I see," she said softly. "They think I've done something wrong." "Not I, Miss Wynne," he said quickly. "But tongues wag. And a man like Elias Boone. He's respected. A widower, yes, but decent." "I know he's decent," she replied. "He's the first man who ever looked at me like I was more than my size or my shame." The Reverend winced, but Clara pressed on her voice, trembling with quiet steel. "They think I'm unworthy, because I was cast off by a man who never loved me, because I was part of a cruel joke, because I didn't leave this place in shame." She took a breath. "But I stayed. I cook. I clean. I work the earth like any settler's wife, and not once has Elias laid a hand on me without kindness. The Reverend shifted his hat nervously. Miss Wynne, it would help if you were married. She met his gaze, then calm and unflinching. Help who? Silence. He gave a stiff nod, muttered a goodbye, and turned to go. But at the edge of the gate, he stopped. There will be a church social next week. You'd be welcome to come. With Mr. Boone. And just like that, the door cracked open. That evening, Elias returned and found Clara quiet fingers tucked into her apron. She told him everything about the Reverend, the committee, the town's judgment. His face darkened. They have no right. They're afraid of what they don't understand, she said. But I'm not ashamed of being here. I'm only afraid of one thing. He stepped closer. What's that? That will let their voices be louder than our truth. Elias nodded slowly. Then he took her hand. Not in a rush, not to make a statement, but because it was time. We'll go to that social, he said. You and me. And if they see love in our hands, let it be their lesson. The world had questions, but their love was becoming its own quiet answer. The church social came with lanterns strung across the oak trees and banjos echoing gently across the prairie. Long tables sagged under cornbread and stew. Children chased fireflies in the dusk. When Clara Wynne stepped out of Elias Boone's wagon, the conversation stilled. It wasn't her dress, simple, blue cotton with a shawl stitched by her own hands. It wasn't her figure, soft and full as ever. It was the way she held his hand, like she belonged to herself and beside him, not beneath. Some women offered tight smiles. Some men tipped hats more out of habit than warmth. But Mrs. Aldora Penwell, keeper of half the town's gossip, blinked when Elias walked Clara straight into the fellowship tent and took the first dance. He wasn't graceful, and neither was she, but there was a rhythm to them, like the land finally letting go of a drought. Slow, steady, real. And that night, for the first time in a long time, Clara didn't shrink. She laughed when she missed a step. She sang when the old hymn broke out on fiddle. She carried a plate of peach cobbler without worrying if someone whispered behind her back, because Elias's hand never left her back, not once. Later, beneath the stars, Elias walked her to the edge of Sunset Creek, where the moon dusted silver across the water. Clara, he said, voice thick with emotion, I don't want folks to have to guess anymore. I don't want you carrying this weight alone. He reached into his coat and pulled out a velvet string with a gold ring tied to it. Simple, strong, worn with use. It was my mother's. I want it to be yours, Clara gasped softly. I don't ask this to quiet rumors, he added. I ask because I've never met a woman with more heart. You didn't just heal this house, you healed me. She took the ring, tears clinging to her lashes like dew on prairie grass. Yes, she whispered. Yes, Elias. He slid the ring onto her finger. It fit. Not because her hand was small, but because her soul had made space for love that wasn't afraid of scars. They kissed soft, reverent, while the water sang beside them. From that day on, no one in that valley said Clara was too fat or too strange. They said she was Mrs. Boone, and that meant something. Because a woman who'd been mocked for her belly and her hope had become the heart of a home built from truth, not appearances. And in that truth, they found a kind of joy that didn't need proving, only living. Sometimes the love we wait longest for is the one that teaches us how to breathe free. In the end, Clara Wynne didn't just clean rooms or tend to the hearth. She mended something deeper, the quiet hurt of a man who had forgotten how to feel warmth and the silence of a house that hadn't heard laughter in years. What began as a job no one wanted became the rhythm of two lives rediscovering purpose in small moments. Fresh coffee in the morning, a stitched tear in a shirt, a look across the dinner table that meant, you're safe now. And when Elias Traeger finally asked her to stay, not as a housekeeper, but as the woman he would build the rest of his life with, she said yes, not with fanfare, but with a hand rested gently in his where it belonged all along. Because sometimes healing doesn't arrive loudly. Sometimes it walks in wearing worn shoes and carrying nothing but kindness. And maybe that's what love really is. A place where you're no longer just useful, but truly seen. If this story touched your heart, we'd love to hear from you. Would you like to see a part 2 or hear more stories like this? Let us know in the comments. And if you believe in stories that heal, that honor the quiet strength of second chances, please subscribe to None. Wild West Saga, share this story, and help us keep telling the ones that matter most. Because somewhere out there, someone like Clara Wynn is still waiting to be seen.